Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So you can see that we have a block, a van, and a head, and some ARP studs. So today we are going to be finally putting the heads on this engine. Now, we have the ARP studs for the inside row of the block here, and we also have obviously our studs themselves that go inside the block face. Always when you get your ARP fasteners, check to make sure that the nuts are threaded, because sometimes it does happen where you get a nut that hasn't been threaded, and make sure you have enough washers because sometimes they like to short you one. Now when you're installing studs, you always want to use their lubricant, follow their directions, and their torque specs. Okay, so you want to make sure that you follow the directions. Now we have a set of Kill Devil diesel heads here, and they are O-ringed, and I checked them for straightness with a straight edge, and we previously surfaced the block in another video. So we also have a lot of other stuff that we have done to this engine. Each one has its own particular video. We have this cover on here for now. It is not secured in any manner. I only put it on there to keep any dust or debris from any of whatever I'm doing in this shop from getting here. We also do not have the oil cooler section here put on. I wanted to get the heads put on and then also get everything secured in the heads, trying to get this engine closed up because it is in an environment that could get dirty. So we're going to be working on getting these heads installed today. There's a lot of stuff in a 6-liter head. You have the rocker boxes and the multiple rockers. It's 4 valves per cylinder. So there's a lot of extras, but we're going to be putting the head studs in today. We've already prepped the block. We just need to wipe it clean, get our studs put in, get our head gaskets put on, put our dowels back in, and then get these heads cleaned also, and then set down on the block and then get them torqued down. So that's our goal here today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wipe the face of this block off and get it nice and clean, but one side at a time. Now we do have these prep wipes. I may use them after we wipe the whole surface down and get it clean and dry. That'll give an even better prep for that gasket. So probably do the same thing to the head over here and make sure that we get a nice clean fit there. So whenever we get this all put together, hopefully we don't have any problems, which is why we've gone through the process to deck this block flat, make sure that the heads are flat, make sure we got new heads, we have new injectors. We're trying to do this the right way. We basically threw the parts cannon at this thing, but it's a 6-liter. It's either you do everything or you do nothing. So we've done nothing for 200,000 miles, and now it needs everything. So we're going to go ahead, get this cleaned up, get the studs installed, get our dowels installed, and start putting these heads on. We've previously chased all of the threads in this block. Now, when we did our block surfacing, that was when I showed chasing all the threads in this block face, the deck face here. That is extremely important. That is one step you never, ever, ever want to skip. We've also sucked all of the oil and contaminants out of the holes and cleaned them out with brake clean with the block turned on its side. So we made sure that those threads are good and clean. Now, there is a residue on them, which is not going to hurt anything. It's just you don't want any pooling in there, and you don't want the threads to have any dirt in them. So make sure you chase your threads before you put your studs in. But we're going to go ahead and clean this block up. Now, I am using a lint-free towel for this. And I'm using the lint-free towel because we don't want to leave any contaminants on the block. So we've gotten all the contaminants off the block surface as far as oils. I'm going to take one of these wipes and I'm going to wipe this all down. You just got to be careful with these because they do catch on edges. So we're just going to be very gentle with this, and we're going to get this all cleaned off and make sure that it's nice and clean. And then we're going to do the same thing on the head before we put it on. But we first have to get this clean and get everything set up on it, and then we can clean the head off and then put it on. So if you're using these Motorcraft wipes, you need to make sure you wear gloves with these. They're supposedly pretty bad for you. So we have that all prepped there. We can go ahead and get our dowels put in and get our studs put in. So we cleaned these previously, and sometimes they're a tight fit, but they will go. So we have our dowels put in here. Now we're going to take our studs. There's a fine end and a coarse end. Coarse end goes down into the block. And you basically just thread these all in until they're all hand tight. So I threaded these all in by hand. You can use a Allen key in the top here to thread these in. I just did these by hand because I like to feel how they go in. Sometimes that can be negated with the leverage of a ratchet or anything like that. So I'll probably recheck these by hand once we get everything installed here, because we're going to do the other side here, get all these studs set in. That way we can just set both on at the same time. But we have our studs installed here. We're going to double check these with the Allen key or a socket with a hex, just to make sure that they're snug. You don't need to put a lot of torque on those. They're just supposed to be hand tight anyway. So realistically, you could just leave this just like this and not torque them down, because realistically, that's all it needs to be. So we have this side all done here. We're going to repeat the process on this side over here. So you can see that I put the other side in with this little ratchet and just made sure that they were snug. So I'm going to do the same thing here. So basically all I did was just put a little bit of a tension on these, probably no more than 100 inch-pounds, So we got our block ready for our heads. So now we need to prep the heads, and first thing I'm going to do is put our gaskets on. So the reason I'm going to put the gaskets on is because we have the surface all nice and clean, and then we can go ahead and place our gaskets on, and we don't have to worry about any contaminants or anything that would be even in the air getting down onto this surface. So we have OEM head gaskets here. These are direct from Ford. These are not mail or maily or however you want to say it. So these are the factory Ford gaskets. So there is not a top or bottom to these. Obviously you have your upper and lower, but not a side to side. So these will just slip on here. Make sure that they go over your dowel pins and sit nice and flat. So we've got our gaskets on here. Now what we need to do is we need to clean the head over here. So that'll be our next step. We're going to get this head cleaned up and installed. So as previously mentioned, we are using the KDD heads here. They are ringed. They are brand new. We did check them for straightness. So now what we need to do is we need to get these cleaned off and ready to go on the block over on the side here. Once again, we use the lint-free towel here. We'll take our cleaning wipe and do the same thing. We'll get this all nice and clean. So we've got the head nice and clean here, and just want to make sure that we don't have any fuzzies or anything left over on the head here, because these towels have a tendency to do those things. So we have this one nice and clean. So I'm going to set it off to the side here. So we've got our other head here and a little bit of debris in there from shipping, which is no surprise. So we're going to go ahead and get this guy cleaned up and ready to go on the block. So we have our head all clean here. What we're going to do is we're actually going to check trueness on this, because I didn't check this one yet. So basically what I was looking for is if I could see any light underneath the straight edge. Now I can check it with a feeler gauge, but I don't have any reason to. Nothing looked very obvious to me. So I think we'll be okay. But either way, if you really are worried about your thickness or your deviation of anything in the head, you can go ahead and do your checks with a feeler gauge. And I'll just show you that to you here. So basically you don't want to be able to get your feeler gauge under there. And this is a 3/1000. So, we shouldn't have any issues there. Obviously we can't check across the face. Now you can check across the rings, The fire rings, you can check to see if they're all the same. You know, you just have to check at the actual ring itself, like that. So we are good because we can't even get a 3/1000 in there. So this is going to be a good head. Like I said, these are brand new, so we shouldn't have any issues to begin with. So now that we have this head all prepped and ready to go, we can go ahead and get these installed. So once we get these installed, then we can go ahead and start tightening everything down. So we've got everything all cleaned up here. The head gaskets, I know I said that they go either way, but they only fit one way. If you put it on, the bolt holes don't line up, then you know you need to take it back off and flip it around. But it's pretty self-explanatory. So we cleaned the heads up. But before we can bolt them down, we have to get them installed, and we have to install the rocker assembly first. But got my dad here. He's just going to help me get these heads put on. It'll be a lot easier to do with him here. So before we get started here, just wanted to show you if we put some bolts in the heads here, it'll help us lift them up and get them installed. So we're just going to go ahead. There's no left or right. They're both the same. We're just going to go ahead and get them put in. So we've got the one head on here. We still got to put the rocker boxes and everything on before we can even start torquing anything down. But we're going to go ahead and get this other head set on here and get that installed. So we've got both heads put on there. Now we're just going to have to start assembling. So we have the rocker boxes to put on. We have the rockers to put on. We have all kinds of stuff to put on. So that's going to be our next step. So we've got our heads on here. I took off the cover here, and I've got everything laid out over here that we're going to be needing. So before I start putting stuff together, we're going to start with putting the glow plugs in. Okay. We have our glow plugs. We're going to put those in. We have our injectors here in the bags with their holders. We're going to put those in. After that, we can put our rocker boxes on, and then we can go ahead and install our rocker arm assemblies and also the bridges. So the bridges, they tell you to match up the wear marks on these bridges. However, the only thing that's going to be the same would be the rocker touching the bridge. Now, we are not using the same valves, not the same heads, not the same springs. Nothing's the same. So the only thing that we're reusing that's going to be touching each other is going to be the rocker arm with the rocker bridge. A lot of guys say that this has to go a certain way, and if you watch the video of me disassembling the head, you would see that, you know, there'd be some this way, and then, you know, there'd be one, you know, that way, or even flipped. And there's no rhyme or reason to how these go on. So it doesn't necessarily matter the orientation as long as they're properly seated. Now, to get us, we're going to put all this stuff in. I have everything cleaned and everything is ready to go in. Now, obviously, we're using new heads, so we not too worried about the bridges at all. But it's a lot easier to put the glow plugs in without the rocker boxes, and it's a lot easier to put the injectors in without the rocker boxes, because I'm pretty sure the rocker box is in the way for the injectors. So we're going to go ahead and start with getting the glow plugs put in. It's a very simple process. No thread, sealant, or anything needs to go on these. You basically just take them and you put them in. So we got this side here we're going to put in, and we're going to do this whole side and then flip over and do the other side. So we're going to thread these in here in a second. But we went ahead and set our dowel pin that's on the front of the engine here. So that's the dowel marker that you would see through the harmonic balancer at the 6 o'clock position. So that'd be straight down. Now, that's what everybody tells you to do when you're reinstalling all of this stuff. I'm going to see how everything tightens down as we go. If we need to make adjustments to the crank as we go, we can do that because we don't want to bend a push rod. We don't want to prematurely open a valve. We don't want to strip the rocker box threads out or anything like that. So we have these started here. So we're going to go ahead and thread these in and snug them down. These don't need to be super tight. They just need to be snug. And then we're going to get our injectors, which are still bagged here, and oil them up and get them put into. So we got our glow plugs tightened in here. Now we're going to go ahead and lube up our injectors, and we're going to use engine oil for the injectors. You can use the silicone lubricating grease if you wish. A lot of guys suggest using motor oil over the lubricating grease. So I've always done injectors with oil, so just going to keep doing it that way. So we're going to reuse the oil that we used for the lifters. That oil was clean and new, was in a container, sealed up. So we're just going to reuse that oil and put that all over the injectors and get them seated and get our hold downs put in. So we have our first injector here, and pull it out of the bag. And I'm going to leave this tip on here for right now. Make sure your copper sealing ring is on here, and then we're just going to take or put our fingers in the oil here and basically just rub oil all over the O-rings here. We don't need to go crazy with this. You don't need to dunk the whole thing in. It's not like a lifter. So we have that all cleaned up there. Pull the cup off of there, and I'm going to place the hold down in and put these things in here. The proper orientation would help, which is the plug up there. So that one's started here. So we're just going to continue this process for the rest of these. You can see that this still spins okay. We want to make sure that we do this without getting anything in this port here. So the proper orientation for these injectors, and I want to cover this before we get into the rest of these, is that you'll see that they kind of like lock into the retainer here, and just slowly wind this down in. And you can feel it stop there. So I'm using the battery ratchet. These get torqued to 32 foot-pounds. That's the spec we're going to be using for these. But I'll torque these all down once they're all installed. So we're going to go ahead and start on the next one here. Same thing. Now I'll pull the booty off of here first. It doesn't necessarily matter. Make sure that your copper O-ring or copper washer is intact here and back in the oil. So we've gotten all these started here. We're going to go ahead and just wind these hold downs in. So now we can go ahead and torque these down to 32 foot-pounds, and that will be the installation of the injectors. So now that we have all these torqued down, we can go ahead and get our rocker box. Now you can put these in after you put the rocker box in, but I chose to put them in before the rocker box because I wanted to really show you what you had going on here. And it's a little bit easier to put these in whenever the rocker box isn't in the way. So it's a lot easier to do this without all this in the way. So we're going to go ahead and get this rocker box installed. Now your rocker box has sleeves here and then sleeves here. So one by my each thumb here. And these need to be in there. They help guide everything together, and they can kind of suck to put together sometimes. So we've got it all slid on here, and now we have to get the dowels that are on the underside to line up with the head. And sometimes that can be a real bear. So I fought with one of these before, and it's just a matter of getting everything to line up the way you want, because you have a little bit of wiggle room here, but everything has to be lined up. Little bit of wiggling, a little bit of pushing, and the rocker box is put in there. Now we'll take our 2 bolts and bolt the rocker box down and make sure that it's not gonna come apart here. So now with that done, we have to torque these down yet. We're going to put our rocker bridges in. So the rocker bridges, you need to make sure that they get fully seated on your valve stems. So we're not too worried about the orientation of these right now. You just got to make sure that they're seated. Because if they're not seated, you run the risk of bending a valve or a push rod and having to do this all over again. So we're going to double check these again once we put the rocker assemblies in. So now that we have our bridges in, we can go ahead and put our push rods in as well. So we have our new Kill Devil Diesel push rods here. These are the updated ones. They're supposed to be better. So they come in packs of 4 here. And there is no orientation for these because these are aftermarket. So just going to go ahead and slide these in here. Make sure you get through the head gasket. Now I have pre-lubricated those lifters. When we put them all in, there was oil on the tops of them there, so we don't need to necessarily lubricate the socket, or so to speak, the end of the push rod there. If you really wanted to, you could put a little bit of motor oil on these and then put them down in. It's not exactly a bad idea. So we have all of our push rods installed, and what we'll do is we'll put a little bit of motor oil on the ends of these push rods before we install the rocker arm assemblies. So before we go any further here, I'm going to torque our rocker box arms, or rocker box bolts. And there's no real torque spec for these. A lot of guys tell you that these aren't useful to have, but we're going to torque them to 23 foot-pounds. Because all that does is basically seal the top of this rocker box in a little bit better. A lot of guys will tell you that it doesn't make a difference, but it's only there to isolate or locate the rocker box on the head. So we torque these down, and now we're going to go ahead and start placing our rocker assemblies on. So with these, You have the little foot here. You just need to make sure that it's in good shape. And you could always take a little bit of oil and dab onto the bridges and also the top of the push rod there. So we're just going to put a little bit of oil on these. And then a little bit of oil on the bridge here. That's just going to help until everything gets lubricated here. You can put a little bit on this foot if you wish and into the socket there. Now you want to get these threaded in pretty far here. Make sure that you don't have any issues with your injector, and make sure that you put these back on in the same orientation that you took them off. So these are all marked. Just need to make sure that these all line up the way that they're supposed to here and get these bolts started in, and then we'll snug them down a little bit. So we're just going to snug these down. And in all reality, I shouldn't even snug them down because you don't want these to be pulling on the head. So we've gotten these threaded in a little bit more. You can see that they're a lot tighter. And that's what you want. You just want them loose, but you don't want them tight. So now we have all of that installed here, and we need to install our O-rings or injectors here. The injector plugs into the actual rocker box. Now for that, I am going to use a silicone grease. I'm not going to use motor oil for that. So we'll get these lubricated up and get them installed. So these don't serve any real purpose other than sealing dirt. Okay. Now, the way that these go in is unbeknownst to me. But I assume that it would go with the latch looking thing up with the flat edge here going down. So those are a very tight fit, which is why the silicone lubricating grease is an idea here. Make sure that you get the O-ring lubricated well enough that these will go in there because it is a very tight fit. With that all said and done, we're going to now finally put some lubricating grease on all of our studs here, and then place our washers and nuts on here and start our torque sequence. Once we get these heads torqued down, we can go ahead and torque our rocker arms. So we are using the ARP Ultra Torque here, and this is what you want to be using. You don't want to be using anything other than this. Of course, why would that work? I love it whenever they seal it past where you can actually open it. So basically what we did there was smash all of that into the threads as best we could. Now we can place our washers on here. So each one gets a washer. And then each one gets a nut. So now that we have these all started on here, we're going to torque these down to 65 foot-pounds. So that's going to be our starting torque for all these. So we're going to do 65 foot-pounds and then get these all torqued in. We're going to get our top bolts started here, which are these little guys that we got from ARP as well. So before we start torquing everything down, we're just going to get those threaded in there. And actually, these need to be lubed as well. So take your assembly lube here and put on the threads of these bolts, like I tried to not do there. Now, when you put these top bolts in, they come bolt and washer. There is a bevel in this washer, so in the center here. So the bevel of the washer goes against the head of the bolt. Make sure that you do that, because if you don't do that, you have a very good chance of breaking that bolt or shearing the bolt or anything catastrophic. So we're going to go ahead and snug all of this down. We're just going to get these top bolts here on the top here. We're just going to get them started. We're not going to torque those down until last. And then we're going to get all these started and torqued to 65 foot-pounds, and then we'll work on the rocker arms. So this is going to give you an idea of what you're basically looking for here. So we have our bridges all installed, and we have our rocker arms installed, and they're loose, which is what you want. We have all the nuts installed up here. We have our bolts installed on the top, and we have our injector plugs installed here as well. Now, I'm assuming that these are the correct orientation. I could be wrong. So if you know the correct orientation, please use your better judgment than mine. So this is what we're shooting for here. So now we're going to go ahead and torque all of the main nuts here to 65 foot-pounds. And once we get these torqued down, we'll go ahead and get the rockers torqued down and start going through the torque sequence that is provided, ending at 210 foot-pounds. So I'll go through that with you as we move along. So we're going to wind all these nuts down on here, and we're just going to use the impact just to wind them down on until they touch. So we put no force on these at all. We just held the rocker braces down and then just ran the nuts down so that they were touching the rocker box here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start torquing these in our proper sequence. So the first one we're going to start with is this guy right here, and we are going to torque it to 65 foot-pounds and just go through the torque sequence and get the nuts torqued to 65 foot-pounds. So we got that one torqued to 65, and then we're going to go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have the sequence here, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. So it's easier to just hang your paper here so that you can kind of see what you're doing, and it's easier to follow through with it. So with that done, we can go ahead and torque our rocker bridges down here. So that's going to be our next step here. We're going to torque the rocker bridges down, and then we're just going to go through the full torque sequence and make sure that we have these torqued down to spec. And then once we get the large ones torqued down, we will come up here and torque the top ones down. And the top ones get torqued to 25 foot-pounds. So we'll do those after we get everything done here. And the one thing I want to note is I put these injectors plugs in earlier. So I had said that I wasn't sure of the orientation. So I looked at our harness here, and the orientation of the plug has the notch in the actual plug itself here that you can see facing you here should be facing towards the valley. So I'm going to end up turning these around before we close this all up. So we're just going to wind these down in. Oh, I would die on the last one. So we got these all wound in. Torque these to 20 to 23 foot-pounds. So that's all torqued. I'm going to flip these plugs around and get these torqued the rest of the way. Not going to show that, just a bunch of torquing. So we'll get this all buttoned up here and try to get this oil rail put back on and hopefully get this covered up. So we've done our 65, our 95, our 135, our 180, and now we're going to do the final one of 210. So if you do not have a engine stand that you can actually secure to the ground, so like this one has the feet that you can wind down to hold it here, doing this on a stand is kind of a pain because you got to try to keep your engine stand from rolling away. So this has the feet, so this makes this a lot easier. However, 210 foot-pounds isn't always easy to do anyway, especially on a shorter bar like this, but we're going to do it. Well, that's a workout. So now we're going to let this sit overnight and recheck these. So when we recheck these, we want to make sure that we still have 210 foot-pounds. So we're going to torque our top bolts here. These are the ones on the top of the head here. I know you can't see them. Don't necessarily want to rotate this engine around, but these get to be 18 foot-pounds. So we'll start them at 18, go 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So do those sequence at 18 foot-pounds, then top them off at 25. Oh, it's so much easier than 210 foot-pounds. So now that we've done the 18 foot-pounds, we're going to go ahead and do the 25. So we've gotten all this torque down, and what we're going to do is we still got to flip our plugs around here, and that's not going to be a big deal. It's just pull the plugs back out, flip them around, put them back in. But you want to make sure that they're oriented the way that your original injectors were. So we'll be doing that, but that's not a big deal right now. But wanted to show you everything here torqued down. You can retorque your rocker bridge assemblies if you wish. However, we're going to let this sit overnight. Now, the reason we're going to let this sit overnight is because we want to let this sit and settle in, because we hurried up and torqued this thing down through its stages, and realistically that should be good. But we're going to let this sit overnight, and then we'll come back through and go through the torque sequence again, obviously starting at 210 foot-pounds. So when we do that, we're going to make sure we don't have any movement in these nuts. So if we get any movement out of these nuts, that means that we've lost a little bit of that torque overnight. So we need to make sure that these are going to sit at 210. And so we'll retorque them down to 210 and then let it sit for another day. Do the same thing the next day. Start out, do our torque sequence 210. If they don't move, then we know that we have proper torque and it's holding. And at that point, we can go ahead and continue reassembling everything here. So the next steps here are going to be, we're going to put the oil rail on and get all of the standpipes and dummy plugs put in. So we'll be putting our lower standpipe in, or we can put it all together and then put it in. So we're going to go ahead and do that here after we get 100% torque on this, make sure that it's 100% right. So we're going to go ahead and do the other side. We won't be doing that in this video here because it's very time consuming to put all this together. We're basically just doing the mirror image that we did here over there. So we're going to flip this thing around and do that. Let the whole thing sit overnight, retorque, make sure everything's good. And then at that point, we can go ahead and put everything back together. And hopefully this thing will be kind of ready to go soon. But so it's very important that you check your torque, very accurate on your torque, and you make sure that this isn't going to change at all. So letting it sit a couple days is not going to hurt anything. And then once it's all torqued down, both sides, after a couple days, make sure you rotate your block or your crank around. So you want to make sure that everything is moving freely, that you don't have any binding, nothing got in the cylinders. God forbid that happens. Make sure that your rocker assemblies are moving as they should. Make sure that you don't have any piston to valve problems. We checked the deck on this after we did our little bit of machining here in house, but we didn't have too much protrusion of the piston, so we shouldn't have any piston to valve contact. But you want to make sure that you have a free rotating assembly. So as soon as this is all torqued down, we're going to spin the engine around and make sure that it's free and clear and we don't have any problems there. If the lifters are collapsed, not full of oil, that's not a big deal. You just they'll fill up, and they will fill up as you start the engine, and you can get it going that way. But we'll prime this engine up when we're all done, but that's much later. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know there's a ton of 6-liter stuff out there. There's a lot of guys that do this that are very good at it, that have made a lot of people's lives easier, and mine included. So shout out to those guys. Hopefully I can continue their process here, showing you their tips or my tips, or trying to get you a little bit better view or a different view. So hopefully this will help you guys out working on your 6-liter. I know we haven't had a lot of 7.3 stuff lately. I know this is a 7.3 OBS channel, but we're kind of branching out a little bit here. We got other stuff too, and we're just going to keep trying to make content for you guys, something that's enjoyable, something that's relatable. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And hopefully you guys are enjoying the videos, and we'll catch you on the next one.